This one is called Driving Forward the Commitments for Change, and that's particularly referring to the commitments that companies were making this time last year, where we had our first institution conference, climate emergency conference, recognizing the state of emergency, if you like, around climate change, the impact of greenhouse gas emissions through the last, particularly accelerating in the last 30 or 40 years. And we've been through that. At that period, we were signing up to these commitments within under the umbrella of Construction Declares and within the Structural Engineers Declare declaration. And within that declaration, there are 11 very important statements, which I won't go through with you, but this conference is very much recognizing that so many firms, 182 in the UK, some large, some small structural engineering firms have declared at this level of change. And to summarize, we've recognized the major contribution that we are making to the climate emergency and the need for really significant shift in our behavior, that we'll need to work with our clients to design buildings that are in better balance with the natural world, and we'll need to seek more positive impact. Now, these are big commitments that we made last year, and this conference is to help people who've made those commitments, companies as well particularly, share with each other how things are going, and I've got a little more for you on that in just a second. So there was this idea that we've admitted and committed that we need to collaborate, we need to help each other, and the conference is helping us do that, helping us make connections, and help us maybe after this conference. I expect more people to talk to each other, and we need to look at this significant transformation. I thought I'd just summarize. I went back to the commitments that came out of that conference, and we put this in more detail into the Structural Engineer, the magazine that you can still access through archive. And we talked about, in practice, needing to measure and monitor carbon. We need to think about design. When we design, we need to think about enough and no more. Within our firms, we need to make commitments to change, and including potentially employee engagement. With our clients, we need to influence the brief as best we can, and certainly significantly reduce new build construction if renovation can do. And we need externally make more attempts to influence policies and change at government level if we have that ability. The institution also agreed for support. It set up the climate emergency task group, and it's they that are running this conference. It has now initiated a significant package of guidance for practice, and Will Arnold will be talking about that. It's started changes within about membership and awards criteria, and it's working to collaborate significantly more than ever with other institutions so that it can influence policy. So these were commitments that were made last year, and each one of those commitments, I can safely say, have been moved forward, but we need to keep driving harder and faster on all of that. So within the institution of structural engineers, these are the key areas that we're looking to support change. As I say, Will Arnold will talk more about that, and also Ed Clark. I wanted to just share with you what I think about in terms of companies. We need to change, we need to think about our own practice footprint, of course. We need to think about our project footprint going across the screen here. We need to think about people and their skills, the training needs. We need to think about, bottom left, new services and markets, because there are big opportunities here. Clients are in a position where they want to make changes. We need to help them be able to do that, decarbonize and rethink their projects. We need, as firms, to be out there and seeking to influence the market and influencing policy so that we can achieve the commitments that we've made. And we need to look at wider business implications. It can be structural implications within our own businesses that we have to think about. I thought you might be interested to see some data. that was coming out. We undertook a questionnaire, the structural engineers declare, and asked firms to respond to a series of questions. We would ask you to still respond to those, and we'll put that questionnaire out again to all signatories after this conference. But it has been responded to by a significant number of signatories, and this first slide shows you across a wide spectrum of scales. We're seeing that there was a sense that some of the commitments were already on the edge of being met, but very significantly a lot of work still to be done, and sense that the changes were happening through this year. Some change has been happening. Was the orange, and then was the strong, 60% saying some change has happened. The changes implemented, particularly noted about staff training here in blue, and about strategy change, which I thought was really significant, that companies who've declared are saying that they have made significant strategic change, the direction of the firm, and this is very, very important. Then if you come to what were the drivers behind those changes, perhaps the most important in red was this increased understanding of the need for change, and finding ways to achieve it. And then in purple, this strategic commitment to making change that was critical. So almost a self-driven set of changes, where I think that the making the declaration helped generate that drive. Then looking ahead, we've got people looking at what challenges were the most significant. High here, the brown comes up as client constraints, which of course is why we really do need to collaborate, work with our clients, help them understand the needs for change, and the fact that in the future, some of the things that were good investments in the past, in the future will not be considered to be such good investments. There's also a concern about time and resourcing, which of course is about fees, and if this requires more money and fees, where's it going to come from? Again, it means working with our clients. That's why this conference really is focused at that higher level of client interface, brief rethinking and so on, and that level of influence that can be possible within firms and the leadership of firms, rather than the task of reducing carbon within design. So the final slide here is to say there is still a lot to do. When you look at how well are you currently meeting the engineering declaration commitments, orange is good, blue is not so good, and there is some significant work to be done. So there'll be, all of these results, once we've had more responses, will be available to you. But it's been very helpful in us setting up the conference, and also, I think, in the conclusions that we draw. So I won't go on into more detail. I think I just want to say that whilst we can perhaps make inroads by reducing carbon in our projects, we can even influence our clients, but to make the really big chunk of change, the rest of the problem, as it says here, it's going to take a time. We need to introduce quite significant change. That sort of transformation is almost a change in our vision for a safe and just space for humanity. And I'll just introduce here, I think I'll make this my last slide. We do need to think in the way that Kate Raworth thinks about shifting what we're trying to achieve. If we're trying to achieve this safe and just space for humanity, it sounds perhaps rather grand, but I think as practice leaders and in setting the direction for our practice, we have to think about the ecological ceiling of what we're doing as engineers, how we are affecting climate change, pollution, air pollution, biodiversity, and how we're helping achieve social foundations, health, safety, peace, and justice. So I think I will leave it at that, because it's important to pass you on. So if I pass you on now to Will Arnold, would you like to talk to us in a bit more detail?
So hi, yeah, my name's Will. I work part-time at the institution, where I undertake climate-related activities. I sit on the task group, and the institution decided it'd probably be worth getting me on board as a paid employee to try and really push that action forward. That's half my week. The other half of my week I spend working at Arnold where I'm a practicing structural engineer. So I sort of do 4 days work per week at each of those. I'm just going to take you through briefly what the institution's been up to since this time last year. And as Mike alluded to, obviously, we came away with quite a long list of actions from the conference last year. And hopefully you've noticed the progress as members. It's not to say that we've necessarily closed all these actions out yet, but we've certainly started on the road to doing that for most of them. And hopefully the change has been fairly visible. Of course, the biggest action that we took away was to set up this task group. It's a small group of people. There's 5 of us in the climate emergency task group, but we have a list of contributors that I think is probably up. It's well above 50 or 60 people now contributing to various activities that we're doing. The strategy being there that we can work faster if there's a few of us trying to set a strategy and direction, and then reaching out to specialists in their field. If we need a note writing on circular economy, we go and track down the person who knows the most about circular economy and ask them if they will volunteer a bit of time for us. We report directly into the IStructE's leadership. We report directly up to Martin, into the engineering leadership group, and we work across the various panels and committees within the institution to do that, and to try and make that change, and to try and help that change be coordinated across everything that the institution does. In terms of what we have actually been doing when we say all that stuff, so I'll go through this triangle from the bottom up because I think it makes a bit more sense. We're starting by trying to reset what it means to be a structural engineer and a member of the institution. So that's right the way through from education. We've been working with the JBM through the exam and the chartership process, which is something that was early days, but we're starting to look at what that means. Right through code of conduct, CPD requirements, and all the way through to the awards. Hopefully you will notice this year there were changes made to the structural awards to reflect this commitment to celebrating sustainable design through our work. Once we've reset the standards, we obviously need to help members get there. And so a bit more on this in just a second. That's what my next couple of slides are really about, because this is the core of my work within the task group. But obviously, just to mention, and you'll see this web address a couple of times, we put all of this guidance we produce, we put it all onto our website for free for members and non-members alike. So please do check that out if you haven't done already. We are doing things like today. So Mike already mentioned that this is the second of 2 climate emergency conferences this year. The first date was sort of working under that raised standards stream of work, and all of the recordings from the 30th of September are now online through the IStructE YouTube channel, and we will shortly put links to all of that on the webpage as well, so that all that content can be watched again. And then obviously today is more about the supporting the profession side, so the crossover between the task group, the institution's activities, and structural engineers to Claire. And then finally at the top of the triangle, we have talking with others, trying to stay joined up, trying to understand what other institutions in the UK and around the world are doing, and just trying to sort of better support each other to make sure that we're all working towards the same common goal. In terms of guidance, because I do feel this is worth mentioning, I mean, a lot of you who are listening today may have seen some of this already, maybe you haven't done, maybe it's this sort of content that's worth sharing with your colleagues or your employees if you haven't done already. Since June, we've published, between June and up to the end of this year, we will have published over 20 guidance notes on various topics around sustainable structural design. We've split all of our guidance into these 6 categories at the bottom of the screen, because we sort of felt that, trying to tackle climate change and trying to, design more sustainably is quite a big, broad topic, and it can be seen, almost overpoweringly so. And so trying to break it down into a few more discrete chunks was felt a good way to go about doing that. So we published quite a lot of content around this throughout this year, and we've had the full backing of the Structural Engineer, which has put us on the front cover for something like 4 out of the last 5 magazines or something. So that's been great. And like I say, all of this content has then ended up on the website for free for anyone who wants to get at it. But of course, when we started on this process at the start of the year, we asked ourselves what we thought would be most useful to give out to members of the institution in terms of helping them upskill. But we always were asking the question, I mean, are we getting this right? Do we really know what we're doing? So as well as producing content, we've also been trying to listen and ask the question as many times as we can. And I will ask the same question again today. If any of you have, requests or comments or thoughts about what you want to see or hear more of, please do just let us know. There's the Q&A box today. My email will just be up at the end if you prefer to email me. And we've been trying to pull together a view of what practicing engineers feel is most useful to them at this time. So we've run surveys through the year. We've had quite a lot of feedback through that. We've obviously asked questions during the last conference, and we'll continue to ask questions today. And we've held meetings at some of the IStructE regions around the world. And this on the screen gives you sort of an indication of the feedback that we've had so far as to what people feel is most important. And so going into 2021, we're trying to focus on some of those areas in terms of the guidance that we continue to produce. So next year, there's going to be a big focus on, individual materials, cement replacement, sequestration, steel production routes, that sort of thing, and quite a big focus on reuse. So we've got a few notes in the pipeline on reusing foundations and, an introduction to reusing existing buildings and maybe convincing your clients that they can get amazing things from an existing structure. But we want to go further through that process into next year. And also, one of the other things that sort of came out of some of these conversations was the need to maybe think about some slightly more global issues. So it's very easy to get trapped in the cycle of thinking about this as being, a UK-style problem with UK-style solutions. But of course, we need to recognise that the sort of lives that many of us on the call today live is only really a fraction of what the average person around the world will deal with. And of course, growth across the world is going to be different rates across different countries. And how do we deal with that going forward? So we'll try and do a bit of work around that as well. So just to close then, a couple of quick slides. These are plugs rather than anything else, because the first slide did say free stuff. Do go to the website, istructe.org/climate-emergency. Nicely laid out. We sort of hashed it at the start of the year. We've organized all of the content into those 6 categories that I showed. So you can hopefully find things fairly easily. The search function also works quite well if you're looking for something in particular. And if you were to click on one of these icons, it would then take you to the page where you can download that PDF, and it also suggests more related content. And that also seems to work quite nicely. So it's quite a good library that we're building up, library of resources. And I would say if you only were to go and look for one thing, and you haven't done already, please do check out the guide that we published at the end of the summer, How to Calculate Embodied Carbon. This is intended to be a sort of one-stop shop for doing carbon calculations on your project, understanding the carbon that's embodied in your design. You no longer have to pick up the VIX guide, the BAF IC database, a host of EPDs, and try and piece it all together. We've put it all in one place. And if you don't have time to read the 40-page guide, we've also written a brief guide to the guide, which is also available on the website, and that's a 4-page document. It'll take you about 8 minutes to read. And just to prove how simple we think calculating embodied carbon is, we put a hand calc on page 5 that shows you that, of course, you can do these numbers on the back of a big envelope on a train with a calculator. So that's hopefully all seen as quite useful. And then the very last slide, following on from that, this is going to come out in October as the Structural Engineer, which should land on your doorstep, I think, on Monday, and will be available online on Friday of this week. We've been starting to look at what we believe is deemed, high carbon, low carbon. So this is a paper proposing a consistent rating scheme for all structures around the world, not differentiating between building typologies, because of course, if something uses so much carbon per square meter, that's true regardless of what it is you're building. And we've had an attempt to look at that against some science-based targets. So we've taken the IPCC's carbon budget for the next 30 years, apportioned it down for building structures, and of course you can do the same sort of process for infrastructure and so on to try and work out what on earth it means we need to do. And Mike showed that graph at the beginning with the sort of, maybe 50% change to our design, and then there's the rest of the problem, as we call it. And I think this graph sort of maybe gives an indication of when that rest of the problem needs to get solved by, because you can see that we hit the 50% of the current average figure by about the year 2027 or 2028 with this, so we don't have too much time. Look out for that like I say, online at the end of the week, hopefully on your doorstep, beginning next week. And do get in touch if you have comments, questions, queries, or suggestions for more content. That's it from me. Hopefully, I'm now seamlessly going to hand over to Ed Clark.
So thanks, Will and Mike. I'm going to build a little bit and reinforce some of the points that they've both raised, and also talk a little bit about the interaction of business goals with climate emergency goals. So I'm Ed Clark. I'm also a member of the institution's climate emergency task group, and for my day job, I'm a structural engineer at Arup. So yeah, just to reinforce that this is day 2 of our conference. Day 1 very much more about the process of sustainable design. So actually how we get to grips with what we need to do as practicing engineers. And, you know, I thought that was really, really valuable in terms of upskilling us and following the institution's framework for change, as well as described, giving really clear, succinct, practical guidance on how we improve what we do on our projects. So there's no excuse now, I think, as a profession. It is an area where we've moved an awfully long way since the first of these conferences held a year ago. So today, then, I think we move much more into the how to implement these changes, how to make it stick on our projects and beyond. So we all know that as engineers, often we have great ideas and aspirations, but unless we can persuade others to adopt those, then we're not making a difference. So the first part of today's conference is going to be about the challenges and opportunities of implementing these changes on our projects. But that's not it. So I'm going to, this is another version, I'm afraid, of the sort of the same graph that Will and Mike have shown. But I just want to put this into a bit more context, this other 50% of the problem that we've been speaking about. So the benchmarking data that we have, and you'll see in the science-based target article that Will referred to, that's going to land on your doorstep on Monday. We have done some benchmarking, and we think that on average at the moment, our projects probably average out at about 350 kilograms of embodied carbon per meter squared for the structure of our buildings. That's both sub and superstructure added together for stages A1 to 5. Some of you in the audience might be sitting there thinking, well, I'm sure my projects are a little bit better than that, or maybe even I'm not sure my projects are always quite as good at that. But on average, that's where we think we're at. That's our trajectory. So if we carried on building as many buildings as we are and designing in the way that we're designing, then this would be our trajectory, a sort of flat line. And by 2050, globally, we might have emitted about 60 gigatons of carbon. That might equate to a total of 60 gigatons of carbon in those projects. That's the area under this graph. But we know that, and the maths behind this again will appear in Will's article next week, that in order to have a reasonable probability of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees C, that we have to reduce that. We can't keep going at that rate, and really the amount of carbon we have to play with over the next 30 years is about 20 gigatons of carbon, so about a third of what we would emit if we carried on at the way we're going. And we think that if we were able to get all of our projects to net zero by 2050, that we would be able to limit our emissions to that value. In other words, the green area under this graph stays within that limit that we need to stick to. But we also know that if we follow all of that practical guidance that we learnt about in day 1, and we practiced lean design on all of our projects, minimized waste, counted our carbon, and really set ourselves some ambitious targets on all of our projects, that we might be able to lower the average from 350 kilograms a square meter down to, say, 150 on projects using those techniques that we already know about. And that will get us a long way to where we need to be, but not all the way, only about halfway actually. It is 50-50. So by doing that, we might save 20 gigatons of carbon, but we still have this blue shaded area that we need to save. And the second part of today's conference, I think, is more about the blue bit and what we need to do beyond individual projects in order to get to where we need to get to by 2050. And that might be around sequestration, it might be around offsetting, it might be around the development of new low carbon materials, or just building less, or other things that we don't even know about today. So that's the complete picture. And we all have different roles to play in this. So some of you might be practicing engineers, design engineers responsible for parts of projects. Some of you might be lead engineers overseeing whole projects. Some of you will be business leaders, leading in big organizations, or maybe even running your own practices. And we all have, whatever the role we play, we all have competing demands on us. So we all have responsibilities to our clients, contractual responsibilities, and we want to exceed their expectations. We have a responsibility to society, a professional responsibility. The IStructE Code of Conduct requires us to have regard to public interest, as well as the interest of all of those affected by our professional activities. We have responsibilities to our employers, to our employees. As leaders of firms, you'll need to provide the best opportunities for your employees, not overload them, but at the same time, win enough work to pay salaries and stay solvent. And simultaneously satisfying all of these responsibilities all of the time is a challenge, particularly at the moment in a period of such uncertainty. So how then are we to integrate the need to also be responsible for the planet, live up to our responsibilities to the environment, not just add that to the list of the other things we already need to juggle, but to put it at the top of the list? How do we go about doing that? At this equivalent last October, I certainly remember having lots of discussion about these competing demands. You know, we debated questions like, do I walk away from a job if climate emergency turns out not to be high on the client's agenda, or if my attempts to reduce carbon are not taken on board, are rejected on projects? Since then, we will all have read articles encouraging us perhaps to advise our clients to build less. You know, we may have wondered, how can we afford to do this? It's hard, particularly under current circumstances, to turn down work. However, I think we have also seen a shift in attitudes over this past year, and it was interesting to see the bar charts and the graphs Mike showed from the survey. I think it sort of starts to reflect this. Many of our clients are now far more conscious of the risks associated with not setting high environmental standards. It's no longer so much about getting the best BREEAM badge for the least additional cost. It's about creating assets that will retain their value in the long term as climate emergency issues become increasingly prominent in the public consciousness. And there are other things changing too. This headline from last Friday, for example, describing how the government is considering proposals for a carbon tax, possibly from the end of this year. So who knows, but policy changes, regulatory requirements, perhaps also coming more into play, leading to change. And it's not just our clients who are becoming more enlightened. I think the tide is changing on other parts of our industry as well. A year ago, the declarations were limited to architects declare, civil structural building services engineers, and that was it. Today, we have contractors declaring, project managers, landscape architects, and the list is increasing all the time. So as structural engineers, I believe we're moving from a position of wondering how we might be able to afford to put climate emergency at the top of our agenda, to understanding how it can become symbiotic as a collective profession, learning from and supporting each other. And I very hope that that will be the spirit of today's conference.